Hello listeners, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing all right. I'm going to start reading from the PDF that I've prepared for this episode, and I'm going to start to do that now. Here we go. Pew! Right. Hello, welcome back to the Bits and Bobs series, in which we are dealing with various listener comments and answering questions about the world of English. In this episode, the plan is to deal with these things. Questions, first of all, about how many words have I ever used on this podcast? How many words actually exist in the English language? How many words does the average native speaker know? How many words do I know? How many words do you know? And how many words should you know? So basically some thoughts and advice about your vocabulary range in English. Secondly, countries in Lapland, places in Lapland. Who are my top 10 countries? Who are my bottom 10 countries? Some audience data and a featured country. So some more insights into the far-flung countries where people listen to this podcast, including a focus on one particular place where you might live, and also, as I said, my top and bottom 10 countries where you might also live, if you can live in 21 countries at the same time. And accents, some stuff about different regional accents in English. On this podcast, people often comment on how clear my RP British accent is, but I believe you also need to be familiar with a wide variety of different accents we have in English, not just standard British RP or general American. There are loads of accents. English is a very diverse language in terms of accents, and I think you need to be familiar with a lot of them. I've done lots of episodes about accents in the past that can help you, but which ones are they? Then fourth, shadowing. Some comments about the language learning technique of shadowing and an opportunity to do it yourself with this episode. So that will be a chance to practice some sentence stress, pausing and intonation with a funny speech from one of my favourite comedy films. So we'll be doing some shadowing practice later. And generally, comments and error corrections. All of this comes via various comments from listeners, and I'll correct a few of their errors while I'm reading them out. Okay, so that's an overview of what's coming up on the podcast in this episode. There is an episode PDF as usual. You'll find a link for it in the description, in the episode show notes for this episode, wherever you're listening to it. And on the PDF, you'll find the full episode notes that I'm reading from here and a detailed vocabulary list at the end. And that should be very helpful for all of you dedicated learners of English out there. You can use it to check what you've heard or to gather new words and phrases. I need to give myself a reminder here to set a 30-minute timer for a water break. Often when I do this, I use my phone, right? I try and get Siri to remind me to do it. And what normally happens is I'll talk to Siri and Siri just doesn't reply to me. And some people have told me, first of all, Luke, you have to say, "Hey Siri," because if you just say Siri, it doesn't work. Well, actually, that's not true, because with the new iOS versions, the new versions of the iOS operating system, you don't need to say "Hey Siri" anymore. You just say Siri. So there's that. And the second thing is, which I think is the problem, is that apparently if I'm looking at my phone and it's unlocked and I speak to Siri, Siri doesn't speak back to me, I think. Instead, it just does what I want it to do, but doesn't talk to me. So the way to get Siri to reply to me is to actually make sure I'm not really looking at my phone while I talk to her. And my Siri is a girl. I chose my Siri to have an Irish accent and to be a girl. That's just what I wanted this time. You can, change the identity of Siri. I've gone for an Irish girl. Anyway, so let's try that. Without looking at my phone, let's see if Siri actually replies to me. Siri, set a 30-minute timer, please. Siri, set a 30-minute timer. Okay, well, fine. It still didn't work. I don't understand. But the timer is going, but Siri still didn't reply to me. What's going on? Siri, why don't you want to talk to me? She just doesn't want to talk to me. I don't know what. Maybe I did something wrong. Did I forget her birthday? It's not Valentine's Day, is it? No, it's not. I mean, not that I'm in a relationship with Siri, although, arguably we are all very attached to our phones. Are you listening to me?
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
I said, are you actually listening to me? I mean, why don't you talk to me when I ask you to set a timer? Rubbish, isn't it? Siri's got a long way to go before it catches up with the other AI chatbots. Just one more question for Siri. Siri, locking my phone now. Siri, how do you feel about AI chatbots like ChatGPT?
Sorry, I don't understand.
I'm not going to get very far with that, am I? Anyway, there is a 30-minute timer set for a water break. Another reminder for you, sign up for LEP Premium for more of this kind of thing. I mean, episodes about vocab, grammar and stuff like that. teacherluke.co.uk/premium. Another reminder, always look both ways when crossing the street, left and right, okay? And a final reminder, always look on the bright side of life. Now, number one, how many words? So in December, I received this comment from Hafez Gada, I think, Gada Hafez 5011. And the comment went like this. I asked ChatGPT about how many words, roughly, Luke has said since the podcast's inception, and it said it's around 7,680,000 words. I'm so grateful for this podcast, for this kind of episodes, for these kinds of episodes, that should be, and for the 7,680,000 words. Heart emoji. First of all, you are welcome, of course, for the 7,680,000 words. You're very welcome. Let me close the window here in my podcasting room. You are welcome, of course, but that's an interesting fact that ChatGPT has come up with there. I don't know exactly how accurate it is. Of course, 7,680,000 means all the words I have ever used, right? I mean, I don't know how it's come up with that, but anyway, that's what that means. All the words I've ever used, including all the repeated ones. I wonder how many times I've said the or have, for example. But what I would really like to know is how many individual words I've said and not repeated on the podcast over the years. So just the number of words I've used, not counting repetitions. That would tell us the vocabulary range of this podcast, which I would be very curious about. Also, how do you measure this? What about phrases, phrasal verbs, idioms, prepositional phrases, or indeed any combination of words which has a specific meaning on its own, right? Do they not count as specific sort of separate things with their own meaning as well? Shouldn't they be counted too? What is the true vocabulary range of this show? I would like to know. It would also be amazing to have a full glossary of every word I've used on the podcast. I suppose that is called a dictionary, isn't it, really? But I'd like to have an LEP dictionary or a leptionary, if you will. That would be extraordinary as a kind of target list of vocab that all true lepsters must know. Maybe one day AI will be capable of doing that. If I just upload everything I've ever done into it and just say, make a dictionary, will you? With this, maybe it'll be able to do it. But I often dream of having a database of all the words and phrases I've ever said. Obviously, premium listeners, you've got all the PDFs with all the vocab lists and stuff. But for the normal podcast, I don't know how I could get that, to be honest. Maybe one day I'll be able to connect my RSS feed to some kind of AI and just let it create a full database of everything I've said with an alphabetical list of words and phrases with example sentences and definitions. That would be amazing. Still, this comment made me think about vocabulary, how many words there are in English, how many words most native speakers know and use, and how many words you should know, and how to find out your vocabulary range. So here are some interesting facts, thoughts and advice in response to this comment. Hopefully, after you listen to this, you'll get a better idea of these important considerations. So first of all, how many words are there in the English language? It's difficult to determine the exact number of words in the English language because languages are always changing. However, here are some estimates. So, starting with the Oxford English Dictionary, the second edition of the 20-volume Oxford English Dictionary, that's 20 volumes, that's 20 books. The second edition of this includes 171,476 words that are currently in use and 47,156 words that are no longer in use. So it includes words that people are regularly using at the moment and some other words that we apparently don't really use anymore. So it's just over 200,000 words. Merriam-Webster, another well-known dictionary, American, this one. Merriam-Webster estimates that there are roughly 1 million words in the English language, but suggests that the figure could be many millions. How come that's so much higher than the Oxford one? Anyway, some other estimates put English vocabulary at about 1 million words, including words like Latin, species names, scientific terminology and jargon. Other factors that make it difficult to count the number of words in English include slang and jargon. It takes time for dictionaries to include new words, and slang and jargon are not included often in dictionaries. Slang, you know what slang is. Jargon is just like specific vocab that's used for specific areas, like, you know, if you work in IT, that's information technology, computers and stuff, you probably have a bunch of technical jargon that's used for that, you know, might not find its way into a dictionary. Also, inflected forms are inflected forms of a word like drive, drives, and drove and driven. Are they all counted as one single word or 4 different words? I'd be surprised if drive and drives are 2 different words, but you can imagine how drive and driven might be considered different words. Also, multiple spellings. For example, there are 12 different words with the spelling post in Webster's third New International Dictionary, unabridged. So post has 12 homographs. That's 12 different words that have the same spelling. Are all these considered to be different words? This is also common for other words like set, which famously has the highest number of different meanings of any English word. So basically, it's hard to work out how many words there are in English and how many are actually in use, but it's a lot, maybe 1 million. We certainly know that English has a very, very broad vocabulary. Part of the reason for this is because it has kind of poached words from lots of other languages, and English is, to an extent, an amalgamation of lots of different, of several languages all jumbled together, which reflects the history of English, which is another podcast for another time. A more pertinent question may be, how many words do you need to know? We can start to deal with that by asking another question, which is, how many words do most native English speakers know? And the word know is in inverted commas, because what does it really mean to know a word? So according to a study by The Economist, most adult native English speakers have a vocabulary of 20,000 to 35,000 words. Their active vocabulary is lower. So obviously we should make the distinction between active and passive vocabulary, which is something that most learners of English should be aware of too. Your passive vocab is just the words you know, the words you can recognise, the words you could probably understand if you encountered them. So that's just all the words you basically know. Your active vocab, it's all the words you can actually use. So, you might read Charles Dickens and be able to understand it. That's because your active vocab incorporates like most of those words. But are you able to use all the words that Dickens uses in his books? Probably not. And that's because your active vocab is actually much lower in volume, size, than your passive vocab, right? So anyway, most native English speakers, their active vocab is lower, probably 10,000 to 20,000. But I've met some people who I think have way less than that, and others probably with more. This does raise another side question about whether it's even good to know or use a lot of words, particularly use. Is it actually good to use tons of words? Does your number of active words mean that you are better at communicating in English? Not necessarily, I think. I mean, have you ever met someone who was so verbose, so wordy, that they came across as pretentious and also quite difficult to understand. There are people like that, aren't they, who just kind of you can't really get what they're saying because they're just using every big word they can think of. They could keep it simple. Sometimes keeping it simple is a much better idea. Winston Churchill was known to be a great speech maker and great communicator, but one of his strengths was the simplicity of his language. A famous quote from Churchill was, "Short words are best, and old words, when short, are best of all." And we equate short words, by the way, with simple words. In English, long words we consider to be fancy and formal, whereas short words are short and simple and straight to the point and direct, which again maybe reflects something about the language's history. Often the short words are the Germanic ones, and the longer words are often the Latin ones. Anyway, short words are best, and old words, when short, are best of all. This is perhaps Churchill's most famous quote on word choice. He understood that while English has a vast vocabulary, simplicity often leads to greater understanding. So, how many words do people know? How many words should you know? How many words should you actually use? So, how many words do you know? 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 Now, you might want to know how many words you know in English, and there are several tests to help you work it out. But to be honest, I think the information from these tests is mostly useless to you. It's quite interesting, but it's not really very useful. What does knowing a lot of words indicate? Does it mean that you're good at English? I mean, certainly using a wide range of vocab is important, but only to a certain extent. I think once you get to a sort of an advanced level of English, and you don't need to know as many words as the average native speaker does in order to be advanced at English. I think once you get to an advanced and proficient level, certainly yes, getting to that level involves broadening your vocabulary, right? But then you don't really need to go beyond that. And in fact, it's when you get to that level, you realise that you've got to be quite selective about the words you use. Now, you might know a lot of words but still not be able to fluently hold down a conversation or understand what people are saying. That's another point. So vocab is only useful if you can apply it to your use of English. Again, I'll make this point again, English is about what you can do, not about what you know. So active vocabulary is important, and being able to apply your English to actually being able to communicate with people effectively is the most important thing. Another question. Lots of different questions here, all jumbled up together. What does it mean to know a word? What does it actually mean if you know a word? What does that mean? Does it mean recognizing it as a word that exists? For example, if you just see a bunch of words, some of them are real words, some of them aren't. Can you just recognize the ones that are real versus the ones that aren't? Does it mean having a general idea of the meaning of the word when used in context? For example, if you encounter it in a text, can you just kind of basically say, yeah, I know what this means? Does it mean you can define it? So can you give a dictionary definition of a word? Does it mean that you know the translation into another language? Does it mean you can pick it correctly in a multiple choice exercise to complete a sentence? Does it mean you can recall the word independently? For example, you're maybe given a definition or given a gapped sentence and asked to come up with the right word. Can you just come up with it on your own? Does it mean you can fluently recall and say or write the word at the right time in the right way, getting the effect that you wanted? Now, to be honest, it's all of those things. But then again, your vocabulary is like an iceberg. And then this is about active and passive vocab. There are loads of words under the surface that you might know, recognise, understand, identify when both written and spoken, but you might not actually use them all the time when you speak or write. So that's your passive vocab. This is like the huge iceberg under the surface. People often talk about passive vocabulary in negative terms, suggesting that passive vocab is way less important than active vocab, and maybe they have a point, but we shouldn't underestimate the importance of passive vocabulary, it plays a huge role in basically keeping our English afloat, right? Keeping the iceberg floating. You need that foundation of background English in order to function, to understand, to work things out from context, to keep things up, to have a sort of subconscious sense of the language as a whole, right? So that passive vocab is so important as the sort of large language sample that you can use to process English as a whole. But of course, active vocabulary is the part of the iceberg which is revealed above the surface. And this is vital, of course, for your fluency, for your ability to function in English and actually communicate and speak and write. I think it's important when learning vocabulary to try to push your active vocab by not only understanding new words, but trying to use them a few times. And I always say this, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. You've got to try and convert words into active use. The more you do this, the more likely you are to retain words actively and be able to use them again later, which is why I'm always, encouraging you to not only read and listen to words, but try to, when you're learning vocab, part of the process involves actually using those words and using them out loud. But also, I think you stand a better chance of holding on to those words passively too. So converting words you've encountered, trying to push them into your active vocab is good for broadening your active vocab, but also it helps you retain those words in your passive vocab as well. So anyway, this is all a bit of a ramble about vocabulary here and how many words you should know, how you can know them, the different ways we know words and how to approach learning vocabulary. So sorry for the rambling nature of this. Another question is, how many words do you expect to know in English? What do you consider an acceptable number of words to know? This raises questions about what level you expect to have, what level you should have, whether your English needs to be or should be the same as a native speaker of English. Now, maybe it will never be the same as a native speaker, because in all honesty, this is probably the case if you're learning English as a second or other language in adulthood. Yeah, that's a bit of a bombshell for some of you maybe. Yeah, you might never achieve the same level as a native speaker, but it doesn't actually matter. You shouldn't be trying to do that necessarily. You should try and push your English as far as it can go, but whether it will be the same level of naturalism, if that's a word, ease, control, as a native speaker, it's unlikely, because honestly, I think you achieve that native level through a sort of inbuilt set of the input and the practice you get in childhood is very difficult to replicate in adulthood. That's not to say we shouldn't be trying to use the same methods, but it's just that as your brain develops and you learn a language through that process, it becomes so intrinsic to you that it's hard to achieve a similar level of depth of intrinsic depth of knowledge and use of a language when you're learning it in adulthood. So trying to be a native speaker is not necessarily what you should aim for. What you should aim for is something more realistic and something much more practical. And to be as good as you can possibly be, yes, but understand that that's not necessarily going to be the same as a native speaker. For example, you might never be able to remove traces of your accent. You might never be able to remove every single bit of influence that your first language is having on your grammar in English. You might never get rid of some of those annoying bits of sentence structure and things like that. Those traces will always be there to an extent. Even if you're using a huge range of words and you're extremely fluent, you're able to do all that, you're very persuasive, you're very charming, you're very eloquent and articulate, you have extraordinary levels of control, you still might show signs of your origins, but that's absolutely fine. Anyway, maybe your English will never be the same as a native speaker, but maybe that is absolutely fine, because non-native level English can also be impressive, effective and powerful. So the point about this is that expecting a certain unachievable level, expecting that as your benchmark, can actually be damaging to you because you set a standard, and if you don't reach it, you just see failure. So watch out for that, and instead just try to be your best and know your limitations, but also know how far you can go. By the way, another point here on this, and we're going all over the place here, aren't we? I hope that that's all right with you. I hope you're keeping up, but I hope you also see that all these things are all interconnected and all relevant to the question of how many words you need to know. By the way, native speaker is not a language level. There are loads of native speakers who are terrible at English, and I include the ones who do business with people from other countries and fail to adapt their English accordingly and just confuse everyone. Right? There are also native speakers who might use all the big fancy words but fail to communicate with people. So native speaker is not a level of English. There are plenty of native speakers who are bad at English and who would get bad results in an IELTS test. So native speaker is not a language level. Right? And in failure to adapt your English is, I consider that to be being bad at English. But of course, it's more than that. There are loads of people who are native English speakers who are just plain bad users of the language, not because they make mistakes, but because they're not clear, they're not applying important communication skills, they don't use the right words at the right time, and they don't have control over the language and more. So native speaker is not a language level. As a learner of English, I think it's best to focus on being able to do as many things in English as possible, focus on practical achievements rather than some paper-based theoretical measure of your level. Stop worrying about it and start using English and focus on real-world successes and failures and how to learn from them, using English as a communication tool. Sure, you might need to get a certain IELTS score, and I think IELTS, of all the tests, is one of the more reliable ones. But that is basically a hurdle you have to jump over in order to get into a university or get a certain job or live in a certain country. And anyway, in theory, being good at English in the ways I described should result in getting a good IELTS score because it is actually a pretty well designed test. Nevertheless, if you really want to find out how many words you know in English, you can use a few tests. You can use the pre-ply test online, which can be a relatively quick way to get an estimation of that number. So the pre-ply test is a two-step test that takes not that long, actually. It's maybe 10 minutes. It starts with 40 words to determine your approximate level, then shows you about 120 words in 4 columns. The way it works is you just tick the words that you know, and you have to be honest. You have to really be honest and say, could you give a definition of that word? If you think you could, you tick it. If you probably couldn't give a definition, then you don't tick it. Right? So, can you honestly give at least one definition of each word? If you can't say what the word actually means, then you don't know it. You have to be completely honest, because otherwise, what's the point? So the pre-ply test this is the quickest one. Right, step 1 is your broad vocab level. We've got words like, look, after, hand, pick, ring, rise, crowd, deaf, mist, dagger, ajar, sobriquet, opsimath. Right, so most of these words are real words, as you well know. Like, look, after, hand, pick, ring, rise, crowd, deaf, mist. Most people should tick all of those. I mean, most people listening to this podcast should be able to tick all of those. Then we get to words like dagger. A dagger is a kind of knife. Ajar. Do you know that one? That's not 2 words. That's not a jar, like a jam jar. No, a jar. The door is ajar. Ajar means slightly open. Maybe that's one you didn't know. The next one, sobriquet. I'm pretty sure that's not a word. And opsimath, is that a word? Oh, okay, it is a word. Is it English? Is it French? Sobriquet is a humorous name that people give someone or something, apparently. Well, I didn't know that word. I've never heard that word in my whole life. And opsimath as well. Anyway, there are some words in here that are so obscure, that that's part of the test, right? That if you know even these incredibly obscure words, then maybe you are like William Shakespeare or something. But most normal human beings will not tick every single word in these lists. Anyway, that's the pre-ply test. Also, Cambridge University, it has an online vocabulary test. It's actually a level check, including grammar and bits of social English. But it could be interesting for an episode of the podcast at some point. That is the Cambridge Test Your English / General English test. There's also a business English one, which would perhaps be more useful. So I could do some more tests on the podcast at some point. The University of Wellington in New Zealand has a vocab test that's also available in PDF format, but it's complicated to interpret the instructions and carry out the test. Basically, it's too confusing for a simple man like me. Remember, the average adult native English speaker knows between 20,000 and 35,000 words, and they actually only actively use about half of that. I took the pre-ply test and I got about 31,000 words. Which I'm fine with. It. I mean, I'm not all the way up there with 35,000, but I'm in the upper area, which I suppose is good. It's what you would expect from an English teacher. But again, knowing this number doesn't really change anything for me. I don't know what that means really for me. It doesn't change anything about my life. So anyway, if you're curious, you could take the pre-ply test. You just have to be honest when you do it, and that will give you an idea. But again, knowing, even if you only get 10,000, that you still might be a brilliant speaker and you still might be able to pass a CAE test or something. Some more advice for you, right? So I asked Google Gemini for more information about this, and it gave me the following. So this is actually Gemini, and then also some comments which are from me. So how many words are needed? How many words do you really need? There's no single magic number for fluency, as it depends on individual goals and how the word word is defined. For example, counting word families versus individual forms, knowing an entire word family. For example, teach, taught, teacher, teaching. Does that mean 4 words or just 1, which is the same point I made earlier? However, there are some general estimates tied to common proficiency levels. So for basic, for English learners, you've got survival / basic communication. This is A1 or A2. I think that this is too low for you. But for this level, in terms of active vocab, we're looking at 500 to 1,500 words. With about 500 words, a learner can manage very simple conversations and everyday situations, like introductions, basic needs. Hello, my name is Luke. Can I have a coffee? Around 1,000 to 1,500 words allow for basic sentence formation and understanding simple texts. Passive vocab is likely to be a bit larger, perhaps 1,000 to 2,500 words. That's sort of like, your basic elementary level English. By the way, if you want to know the most important words to know in English, there are several lists published by Oxford. These include the Oxford 3000, which basically covers the A1 to B2 range of levels, and then the Oxford 5000, which goes up to C1. That's interesting, isn't it? If you know, and I suppose can use, all 5,000 of those words in the Oxford 5000 list, then you are capable of getting a C1 level in an IELTS test or something like that. That's interesting, isn't it? That's my 30-minute warning for having a drink of water. But that's interesting. So maybe you can get advanced level English with an active vocab of 5,000 words. So that's the Oxford 3000 and Oxford 5000. They've done research and they've actually written a list of the 5,000 most important words to know. There's also the really useful Oxford phrase list, which shows the most important phrases to know. And this is brilliant because when you consider that English is a very phrasal language, suddenly the number of vocabulary items you need to know rises significantly. Perhaps it is wrong to measure English by the number of words it has, and instead you should see English as a system of phrases which have their own distinct meaning, and this then covers things like used to or get used to doing, and all the prepositional phrases, phrasal verbs and idioms we have. This is really important, isn't it? So there's a link here for Oxford word lists, which is definitely worth checking out. Let me just let me just open this so I can have a look at it. So you've got the Oxford 3000 and 5000 lists, the Oxford Phrasal Academic Lexicon, the essential vocabulary for academic writing and speaking. Definitely good if you are maybe looking at academic English, the academic version of the IELTS test. It would be good to check out those lists. The Oxford Phrase List, the most important phrases to learn in English. Let's go to that list and have a look. And we've got, A to Z. It shows us the levels. Most of these are like the A or B levels. We've got things like a bit more, a bit of something, a couple of something, a few, a good idea, a great deal, a kind of, a little bit, a little more, a long time ago, a long way, a lot. All right, let's see if we can just filter out those low-level phrases and just look at C1, what they consider to be C1 phrases. We end up with things like as far as this is concerned, as opposed to, as the expense of, at the hands of, back and forth, to be attributed to something, to be entitled to something, to be found to do something, to be meant to do something, to be reported to be something, to be said to be something, to bear something in mind, to bring something about, to bring something up. You can see a lot of phrasal verbs and things. So very useful resource, I would say. That's the Oxford learnersdictionaries.com/word lists. You'll find the link in the PDF. Then when we look at from B1 to B2 levels on this Common European Framework of Reference, we're talking about conversational fluency. And this is a range of between 2,000 to 3,700 words in active vocab. At B1 level, learners can talk about work, social life, travel, and express opinions. At B2, they can discuss more complex topics, understand most news and articles. Really? Understand most news and articles at B2 level? I'm not sure about that. And participate in everyday conversations. And I've written, I'm sceptical about that, to be honest. Anyway, many sources suggest that 3,000 common words make up about 95% of daily English conversations. Let me just say that again. 3,000 common words, so that's probably the Oxford 3000, make up about 95% of daily English conversations. But this also shows us that getting truly advanced English means going beyond this pool of common words and phrases and expanding your knowledge to include the more obscure and less frequent words. Let's just say this: if you've got your core of, let's say, the 3,000 or 5,000 most important words, but when you expand beyond that and you use words beyond that, the less frequent words, when you get into that territory, you're talking about making much larger gains in terms of your level of English. So if you go beyond 5,000 words into 6,000 words of active vocabulary, then you're pushing into areas of proficient use of English, right? That's interesting. Small gains, like it tells me something about the curve of progress that you make when you're learning English, that you make huge amounts of progress in the beginning as you go from A1 to A2 to B1 and to B2. That's a huge rate of progress, or at least you feel like it's a huge rate of progress, because there you are learning really the lion's share of English, right? All of the most common words, and there's a lot of them, 3,000 to 5,000 words that you are learning to use. And then as you progress into more advanced, higher levels, into maybe a proficient level of English, the number of words that you learn as you're studying gets lower, right? It's much more refined. The air is rarefied at that level. So you feel like you're making less progress. But maybe the way to think about it is that as you learn these more complex and less frequently used words and phrases, the value of those words and phrases becomes higher, because that's where you start to push beyond the sort of everyday stuff. In terms of passive vocab at the B1, B2 level, we're looking at 3,000 to 5,000 words or more. To understand most conversations and general written texts, a passive vocabulary in this range is usually sufficient. Then, for advanced or professional fluency, we're looking at C1 to C2 levels. Active vocab between 4,000 and 10,000 words. At C1, learners can use English naturally in various settings: work, school, understand long and complex texts, and discuss abstract topics. C2 implies near native fluency across almost all topics, including idioms and advanced grammar. So in terms of passive English, passive vocab, 5,000 to 20,000 or more words. For a C2 level, a passive vocab of around 10,000 to 20,000 words is often cited for understanding literature, academic texts, and a wide range of content. That's a lot, actually. That's actually a lot, isn't it? I said 5,000 and beyond that. In terms of active vocab, right. Making small gains in terms of broadening your vocab can lead to higher gains in terms of your level. But getting a passive vocab of 10 to 20,000 words, surely this shows that you've got to absorb and consume a lot of English in your life. You've got to do a lot of reading and a lot of listening in order to sort of compound a high number of words, so that you've encountered so many words in English that they are sort of lying there in your subconscious, in your passive vocab. So again, more evidence that reading a lot and listening a lot is really important. For native English speakers then, the average native speaker, estimates vary widely depending on how a word is counted, but typically range from 25,000 to 35,000 words. In terms of everyday usage, interestingly, native speakers only use about 1,000 to 3,000 words in everyday conversations, highlighting that a smaller, well-used active vocabulary is highly effective. Right, we know this. Passive vocab. Native speakers' passive vocabulary is significantly larger, potentially 5 times their active vocabulary or more, reaching tens of thousands of words. Okay, so key advice for learners. I'm going to give you that advice in just a moment. Let me have my drink of water to make sure I stay fully hydrated here. Let's have a water break, and then I'll give you some key advice in terms of your vocab range. So in the past, when I've taken a water break and I've drunk from my bottle, I used to use a plastic bottle, but I got complaints that it was ugly. So I've stopped using. I'm using a metallic bottle now. I also got complaints from people saying that they didn't like the noise that I make when I drink, or that most people make. It's not just me. That you can just hear me drinking, and I got complaints for that. So I started to cut out the noise of me drinking. You can't hear the glug, glug, glug of me drinking anymore. And then I got a comment saying, what was it? It was like, why did you remove the sound of you drinking? It sounded, it's something like, it's annoying when I can't hear you drinking. So just can't win, can you? You do it this way, some people complain. You do it that way, some people complain. It's just like, I know full well you can't please all the people all the time, and you shouldn't try. But anyway, that's just the way it is. Right, so that key advice then. First of all, focus on high frequency words first. Learning the most common 800 to 3,000 words will give learners, that's you, a significant comprehension boost, often 75 to 95% of everyday English. Several things to consider. You have to know how words sound in fluent speech. And again, knowing words is only part of the puzzle. For example, in listening, you need to know how these words combine with other words in sentences in fluent speech. Right? If you spend your time memorising the words in the Oxford 3000 list, for example, you might not recognise them when listening to people actually speaking English. Right? That makes sense, doesn't it? So don't forget the real world practical situations in which English is used, and remember that words exist within a spoken system which includes pronunciation, connected speech, word stress, weak forms of vowel sounds, etc. So basically, Keep listening and reading a lot and be mindful of the way words are incorporated within those systems. Basically, learn words in context. Don't just learn them isolated in lists, because when you actually encounter those words in the real world, you might not recognize them. So learn English in context. Secondly, prioritize active use. As I said before, this is the common advice, but let's not underestimate passive vocab. Anyway, prioritize active use. While passive exposure, that's reading and listening, is crucial for building passive vocabulary, learners, that's you, hello, should actively practice using new words in speaking and writing to move them into their active vocabulary. This requires deliberate practice. So when you are, let's say you're reading and listening, you might make your vocab list. You might take words from wherever you get them, from, for example, vocab lists that I provide to you. You then, when you're studying with them, you need to try to use them and use them in context. Thirdly, context is king. You should try to acquire words in context, that's in sentences, in dialogues, in real life situations, rather than just memorizing isolated words. Fourth, don't obsess over counting. Emphasize, spelt with an S, emphasize practical communication and understanding over hitting a specific word count. The ability to use words effectively is more important than the sheer number of words you know. Fifth, identify personal goals. The number of words needed varies based on a learner's objectives. For example, you're just using it for travel, academic study, professional use. Remember to tailor your vocabulary learning to your specific needs. And number 6, be patient and consistent. Building a strong vocabulary takes time and consistent effort. It's a continuous process, so enjoy the ride and listen to Luke's English podcast every day. Haha. So by understanding these distinctions and focusing on strategic vocabulary acquisition, you can make efficient progress towards your fluency goals, one of which should be to expand your range of active and passive vocabulary in English. There you go. You're welcome. By the way, remember there is a vocab list at the end of this episode, which you can just have a look at, and you can use it in any way, any which way you prefer. Right, let's move on now to the next item in this Bits and Bobs episode. I wonder if I'm going to get through everything here. The last time I did this, in Bits and Bobs 4, I went through a big list of all the stuff I wanted to do in the episode. I got maybe 3 items through and realised, oh no, I can't do all of this. So I'll stop here and do the rest in the next episode. I think I might end up doing the same thing here. We will see. Anyway, the next item on my list is all about where are you? Where are you? Where are my listeners? And also one featured country, one country which I'm going to talk about a little bit. I do this in episodes sometimes. I talk about a featured country. That is a country where people listen to my podcast, but a country that perhaps I don't talk about or that often. Which country will it be? Is this your country? Let's see. So, number 2, Uzbekistani listeners, assemble! So, Uzbekistan is my featured country in this episode after I received this comment on my website some time ago. By the way, if you're looking at the PDF, you'll see some words are highlighted in a lurid yellow colour. These words and phrases are included in the vocab list at the end of the PDF. So, I got this comment on my website a few months ago from Ilios, and it says this: "Hello Luke, we love you in Uzbekistan. You're very famous around English learning people here. I've got a please for you." Yeah, is that intentional? Because please is not normally used like that. A request maybe. Please mention my name, my country, or my comment in your next episode. I think it'll make your podcasts more popular in Uzbekistan. Please, please, please. Okay, so shout out to Ilios and the people of Uzbekistan. Currently in 54th position in my leaderboard of locations for my podcast audience. That is quite a lot higher up the table than Paraguay, which was the featured country in Bits and Bobs Part 3 from last year. So Uzbekistan in 54th position. Let me just give you the names of the countries above and below Uzbekistan. So we've got Uzbekistan in 54th position. So and then above Uzbekistan we have Portugal in 53rd position, Azerbaijan in 52nd position, the Philippines in 51st position, Myanmar or Burma in the 50th position, Belgium in 49th position, Morocco 48 and Algeria 47. Those are the countries just above Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to try and beat those countries. Currently below Uzbekistan in the list, we have in 55th place Georgia, followed by Kuwait in 56th position, Denmark in 57th position, Bangladesh in 58th position, Macau in 59th position, then Chile in 60th position, and Qatar in 61st position. Okay, so again, guys, you're going to have to work harder. Spread the word of Luke's English Podcast, or just listen to more episodes if you want your country to get higher up in that list. This is the premiership of countries. So since Uzbekistan is my featured country today, here are a few facts about Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan, officially also known as the Republic of Uzbekistan, is a doubly landlocked Central Asian sovereign state. It is a secular, unitary, constitutional republic. Secular means that it doesn't have a state religion. Unitary means it's not divided into federal states like the United States, for example. It's a constitutional republic, so no royal family, comprising 12 provinces and a capital city. Its capital city is, that's right, Tashkent. Now, quiz question for you. A quiz question for you. Uzbekistan is bordered, we know it's doubly landlocked, so it's bordered by 5 landlocked countries. Can you name them? So what are the countries that border Uzbekistan? There are 5 of them. Can you name them? Right, well, here's the answer. So we have Kazakhstan to the north, Kyrgyzstan to the northeast, then Tajikistan to the east/southeast, Afghanistan to the south, just a little bit of a border there. Then we have Turkmenistan to the southwest. A lot of stans in there. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and then of course Uzbekistan in the middle there, surrounded by all those other guys. Here are some fun facts about Uzbekistan from the transfergo.com website. Uzbekistan is double landlocked. Yes, you read correctly. Not only is Uzbekistan a landlocked country, landlocked means it has no access to the sea, right? No coastline. But Uzbekistan is double landlocked. So not only is Uzbekistan a landlocked country, but the countries that surround it are also landlocked. This means that to reach a coastline from Uzbekistan, you need to pass through at least 2 other countries. If you want to go to the beach, you've got to go through at least 2 other countries. Paul Taylor clearly needs to move to Uzbekistan. It does have a coast on the Aral Sea, but this is technically an inland lake and not an ocean, so that doesn't count. Quiz question. Are you ready for another quiz question? So, there is only one other double landlocked country in the world. Can you name it? There's only one other double landlocked country in the world. Can you name it? Another country that's surrounded by other landlocked countries. Can you name it? And in fact, do you even live there? Well, the answer is Liechtenstein, of course, in Europe. Liechtenstein is the only other country in the world to be double landlocked. It is bordered by Austria and Switzerland, both of which have no oceanic coastline. Another fun fact about Uzbekistan, it is big on cotton. Cotton is one of Uzbekistan's biggest exports. In fact, it accounts for 17% of the country's exports, and its cotton makes up 4 to 5%. That's 4 to 5, not 45. 4 to 5% of the world's overall production. So if this t-shirt that I'm wearing represents all of the world's production of cotton, not that that is the case, because that would be a very bad way to produce t-shirts, to procure all your cotton from every single place that you could possibly get it. No, I don't know where the cotton that this t-shirt was made came from. But anyway, if this t-shirt did represent all of the cotton in the world, 4 to 5% of this would be Uzbekistan. So what's that? Like a little bit of one of the sleeves of my t-shirt. Thanks a lot for that, for the cotton. So this makes Uzbekistan the world's 7th largest producer of this staple textile. Staple meaning that we use it a lot. We use it sort of every day. A textile is a fabric like cotton, wool, silk. Another fun fact, the country has some unusual etiquette. Etiquette means like social rules. For example, etiquette in England is that when you meet someone, you shake their hand and maybe look them in the eye. Hello, nice to meet you. That's etiquette. You don't put your elbows on the table when you're eating. That's another example of etiquette. Right, so Uzbekistan has some unusual etiquette, apparently. Like most countries, Uzbekistan has some unusual etiquette unique to the country. For example, in England, you don't put your 2 fingers up. I mean, you can put your 2 fingers up, but you got to hold your hand up, palm out, in a sort of peace sign. That's how we say 2. If you put your 2 fingers up with the palm facing forward, that is a rude gesture, which is similar to sticking up your middle finger, which most people know is rude. But in England, the 2 fingers, your index finger and your middle finger, if you put them both up, it's like, fuck off, mate. It's a rude gesture. That's an example of unusual etiquette from Britain. But Uzbekistan, their unusual etiquette is that handshakes are only acceptable to take place between 2 men. Apparently, only men can shake each other's hands. Is this true, Uzbekistani people? So if you're greeting an Uzbek woman, you should bow down to her with your right hand over your heart, which is pretty cool, actually. You're supposed to bow, lean your head and your body forwards, holding your right hand over your heart, which is pretty awesome, actually. My lady. Another common etiquette is to run your hands over your face at the end of a meal to express gratitude. Is that true? So you kind of run your hand over your face. Oh, thank you so much for the meal. Is that true? I've never heard of that before in my life. Another fun fact, it is a cradle of astronomy, meaning to an extent it was a birthplace for astronomy. So Ulugh Beg, a 15th century ruler and astronomer, someone who studied the night sky, the stars, from Uzbekistan, built one of the world's finest observatories in Samarkand. An observatory is a place where you can look up at the night sky and study the stars and planets. He made remarkable advancements in astronomy, calculating the length of a year to within 1 minute of today's measurement. Wow. Nice one. Now, you're probably... So that's Uzbekistan. Shout out to any Uzbek listeners who are currently out there in podcast land. You can confirm or deny those things about etiquette. Is that true, that you don't shake hands with a woman, that instead you put your hand over your heart and bow like someone out of Game of Thrones or something like that? And what about the other thing? What was it? What was the other thing? You run your hands over your face at the end of a meal to express gratitude. Is that true? Now, listeners, you're probably curious about my top countries now, aren't you? So which country... Sorry, actually, I mean location. I have got into trouble with some listeners from somewhere for, as long-term listeners might remember, maybe I should refer to these places as locations rather than countries, because to an extent it is controversial to call at least one of these places a country, but I actually don't care about that. So let's say country, location, whatever you want, okay? Now, which place do you think is currently in the top spot? So here's an overview of the top 10 locations for Luke's English podcast at the moment. And this is just for the audio podcast, by the way. YouTube will have different data, but I'm just talking about the audio stuff. Now, to be honest, I take this data with a pinch of salt, because I think that some places use VPNs, which might affect the data. And of course, the data is skewed by population size. So obviously, if you've got a country with a high population, naturally you're going to get more people listening there, right? And anyway, I love you all, wherever you come from and wherever you are right now in podcast land. As far as I'm concerned, when you listen to this podcast, you are all citizens of Lapland. Everyone is united under one flag. All citizens of Lapland. Sorry, subjects, not citizens, subjects of Lapland, because of course I am the king, or maybe the emperor of Lapland, and you are all my loyal subjects, because I'm the king. But don't worry, I'm a benevolent king, of course. You know, like free ice cream for children and all that stuff. Right, we've been there before. Right, anyway, current top 10 countries for Luke's English podcast, audio, in terms of audio. Top country, Taiwan. Sorry, location, place, country. It's a country. Taiwan, ni hao. Then followed by Japan, konnichiwa. Then Saudi Arabia, merban. I'm probably going to get all of the pronunciation of these wrong. So that was Saudi Arabia, merban. Then fourth country, the United Kingdom. All right, mate. I thought you could already speak English. What's going on? What's going on? Probably learners of English, right, in the UK. If you are in England or Britain or anywhere, you know, if you're in the UK right now and you're learning English, hello. Next, we got Germany. Hello. Then the United States. What's up? Hong Kong. Ni hao. Then Turkey. Merhaba. Poland. This word is really difficult for me to pronounce. How do you say that? Chaish. Sorry, Poland, I got that all wrong probably. And then, in 10th place, Korea, the Republic of. Annyeonghaseyo. So that's my top 10 countries. But again, I love everyone else too, okay? All my listeners, all my royal and loyal subjects. Now, if you want your country to get in the top 10, tell your friends about Luke's English podcast, okay? Spread the word. And if you can't listen for some reason, I don't know how you're listening to this if you can't actually listen to the podcast. If you can't listen, like, for example, if the podcast doesn't work in an Apple podcast app, then it means that LEP might have been blocked in your country. I believe it is currently blocked on Apple Podcasts in China, which is a pity. Apparently, the powers that be have decided that Luke's English podcast is just way too dangerous and it's not allowed. But it's annoying because I've got quite a lot of reviews on Apple Podcasts from Chinese listeners who are giving me 1-star reviews because the podcast will not play. They try and play the episodes and they don't work. But it's not my fault. It's because the podcast has been blocked. I think a couple of years ago, maybe it's because I did an episode with my dad about politics. And if you talk about politics or you use the word politics or if you use certain words in your episode descriptions or titles, then the podcast gets flagged and it got blocked. That's on Apple Podcasts. I think you can listen to Luke's English podcast through other platforms in China, but it's a pity. But please do not write a negative review in Apple Podcasts saying that you can't listen to the podcast or it doesn't work and give me a 1-star review because you're dragging my rating down, the all-important rating. It's not my fault. Please speak to your government if they will actually listen to you. That was my top 10 countries. By the way, I'm going to tell you my bottom 10 countries now, with the one at the top of this list being the bottom country, weirdly. Okay, so these are the bottom 10. Now, if you're in any of these places, I want to give you a very, very special hello. Okay? I would love to know more about you, and I'd love to know more about your story if you are a listener in any of these places. So this is an interesting combination of Caribbean, African, South American, and Pacific nations here, and a couple of islands as well, little islands in the north, like, for example, the Faroe Islands. So in terms of, I'll go in reverse order. So number 10 is the Bahamas. Clearly just having a lovely time on the beach, far too busy just being in the sunshine to listen to this podcast. That's the Bahamas in 9th position in terms of getting slowly to the bottom spot here, right? Åland Islands, which is one of those northern islands. I think it's technically owned by Finland. Then Suriname and Aruba, Belize, Faroe Islands, Samoa, Palau, Central African Republic, and finally, the very bottom is Guyana. Hello, all guys in Guyana, guys and girls in Guyana. How many of you are there? I don't know. But if you are listening to this now, hello, I want to make a very special hello to you. And please get in touch and let us know who you are and how you're doing. Moving on to the next thing. Is this a first for a Lepster? Is this a first for a Lepster? And this is also another request for you to get in touch with me. I want your comments. I got this message on Facebook, actually, which I no longer use. So if you're trying to contact me on Facebook, it's not going to work because I just don't check Facebook Messenger and message requests and stuff. I just don't use Facebook anymore. But I got this one on Facebook when I was using it and I kept it. And it goes like this. The first message was, "Hey Luke, I'm a ninja." And I replied, "Not anymore, because if you get in touch with me, then you're not a ninja anymore. Your ninja status will be revoked for a limited time. If you no longer contact me again, then you will be consigned to the shadows again and you'll be labelled as a ninja again. But if you get in touch, then your ninja status is revoked for a certain period. So, hey Luke, I'm a ninja." Not anymore. And then he wrote back and said, "Hello Luke, today I'm listening to your podcast while I'm harvesting olives." That means picking olives, collecting olives. That's nice, isn't it? In the podcast with your mum, part 1, this is an old episode, you mentioned that most of the Lepsters listening to you, you mentioned that most Lepsters listened to you while using public transport. I think it's probably true. So I'm not one of them, and maybe I'm the first Lepster that listens to you in an olive yard. You should mention my name in your next podcast to prove that you are a real person. And also, if you need some olives, just text me. Thanks for all. Okay. And he sent a picture of himself in the olive yard with his phone, with my logo on it. This is Atuk. Hello, Atuk. Well, let me confirm that I am indeed a real person. Here I am replying to you. Finally, with this reply, you have confirmation that I really do exist and that I really am a real person. So, Atuk, if you can just email me some olives, that would be great. Thanks very much. Everyone else, question for you. Have you ever listened to me while in an olive field, or is Atuk really the first person? And another question for you, listeners. Do you ever listen to this podcast in an interesting situation? I would love to know. Are you doing something interesting while listening to this right now? Are you in an interesting location doing something unusual? Okay, let me know by leaving a comment under this episode or by getting in touch. luketeacher@hotmail.com. I want your stories. I want your photos. I want your comments. I want your jokes. Tell me the situations in which you are listening to this podcast. Do you ever listen to this in an unusual situation? An interesting location? Please get in touch. Leave a comment. I want to know all about it. Let's move on to the next item, the next bit. Different regional English accents on Luke's English podcast. So I got a comment on episode 460, which was called Catching Up with Amber and Paul, number 6, featuring Sarah Donnelly. In this episode, we spent some time speaking in different accents, especially Northern Irish accents, as Paul's mum is from Northern Ireland, or should I say Northern Ireland, which is like Northern Ireland in a Northern Irish accent. Sarah used to live in Belfast, and I used to live in a house full of people from Belfast, which is obviously the capital city of Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland. So we have been exposed to quite a lot of Northern Irish accents over the years, and generally I love hearing them. And I have to say I really enjoy attempting to copy a Northern Irish accent like I do with most accents. I love doing accents, which I hope is not offensive in any way. It probably is somehow, but that's not my intention. because, they say mimicry, that's copying someone. Mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery, as they say. So no offence is intended if I ever do a Northern Irish accent. Like if I ever speak in a... Oh, it's not going to sound good now. I need some practice, need to get into it. How are you? How are you doing? How are you, big man? Anyway, we love different accents, and I have a soft spot for Northern Irish accents. Liam Neeson is from Northern Ireland, for example, which might be why I can't stop talking like him. Anyway, Greg Falcon wrote this comment under the episode. He wrote this: while listening to the episode, I was absolutely fascinated by all those accent parodies the guys made. Of course, it's a bit of fun, but also it's quite interesting for people who know only two particular accents from the English-speaking world, British and American. I wonder if it's a good idea to make an episode dedicated to this theme, like choose the most popular English accents from all over the world. I think you mean most common, because common means widespread, frequent, whereas popular means that people like them, right? Okay. So this would be the most common English accents in terms of frequency in their existence. That's common. So choose the most common English accents from all over the world and the UK and explore them. Maybe Greg meant popular because some accents are more popular than others, right? Like Scottish accents are often considered to be very popular. Scottish accents are often considered very, very popular and charming. People love a Scottish accent. If there are different kinds of Scottish accent. I don't know what kind this is that I'm doing right now. It's terrible. Scottish accents are great, and often considered to be very popular. Whereas, like a sort of a Birmingham accent like that is often sort of considered to be one of the least popular accents in the country. People often criticise Birmingham accents. I love a Birmingham accent. I'm from the Midlands. Anyway, an episode about different English accents. Greg continues, imagine this curious theme supported by Luke's parodies. I remember a Scottish man's speech in the Victorian Detective episode performed by Luke, if I remember right. I think it was Paul actually who did that. And it was just amazing. How do you feel about this idea, Lepsters? Luke, please think about it. Well, hi Greg, are you still listening? Radio silence from you in the last few years, actually. Greg used to comment quite a lot, but then we've heard nothing from him more recently. But Greg, actually, I've done a few episodes about accents, but it's always worth coming back to the subject in other episodes, so maybe I can do that again. But check out these ones from the archives. They all involve different regional accents in some way. Listening to examples of them, breaking them down, trying to copy them, and explaining what cultural associations we have with them. So I've done a lot of different episodes about accents in the past. Check these out. So episode 56 was called British Accents and Dialects. I give you a little tour of the country. Episode 58 was an interview with Leslie from Scotland, and we talk about Scottish accents in that one. Episode 59 was all about a Glaswegian accent, and I analyse a clip with Billy Connolly, one of Scotland's most famous exports. Episode 67 was all about a Cockney accent, and again I analyse an interview with Ray Winstone, who's like a famous Cockney from England. 107 was called Messing Around with Accents and Voices, which was a silly fun episode with Kate Fisher. And we just basically sat opposite each other and just spoke in different accents the whole time. Episode 171 was called A Cup of Tea with Daniel Burt, and we looked at Australian accents. There's a video which you can find on YouTube which is called Playing Around with Accents in English, where I just sit there and just talk in different accents for a while. Episodes 279 was with Marcus Keeley from Northern Ireland, and we talk specifically about the Northern Irish accent, which is quite interesting. Number 404 was called British Accents in the Lord of the Rings. And that's the Lord of the Rings films, and the characters. There's a wide range of different characters, and they've all got these different accents. And it was interesting to explore how those accents sound, but also the reasons why those accents were chosen for those characters. That's a two-part episode, 404 and 405. 422 was called Learning British Dialects with Korean Billy. Korean Billy is a Korean guy who is fascinated by different regional accents in the UK. 427 was called British Comedy Limmy's Show. 427 and 428 actually. And Limmy is from Glasgow, and in his comedy, obviously, he uses like different Scottish accents. Episode 469 was called British Comedy John Bishop, who's basically got a Merseyside Liverpool accent. 470 was called Understanding the Liverpool Accent, where I break down all the features of the Scouse accent. Episode 495 is called Australian Stereotypes and Cliches with Oliver G, and that one obviously involves Australian accents. Episode 516 was called Paul McCartney's Spider Story, which involves a Liverpool accent. Episode 575, British comedy Paul Chowdhury, that involves a few different accents. Episode 584 was called Posh or Not Posh Part 3, where we looked at differences between a posh accent and different regional accents. Episode 656 was called 656 was called British comedy Carl Pilkington's Monkey News. Carl Pilkington speaks in a Manchester accent. Episode 657 was called Why Do Brits Sing with American Accents? I compare British and American accents. And then episode 682 was called Key Features of English Accents Explained. That's where I break down different regional accents from around the country, comparing them to sort of standard British received pronunciation. So all those episodes are available in the episode archive, teacherluke.co.uk/episodes, and you can find all the links on the PDF for this as well. So check them out in the archive. Now we're going to move on to the final part of this episode, which is all about shadowing. And this is a comment from Wojciech Włodarczyk. Wojciech Włodarczyk. I think that's how you say the name. So, Wojciech Włodarczyk. And first of all, I want to say, hello, Wojciech. Are you the famous Polish champion volleyball player who won the ENEA Polish Super Cup in 2014 and the bronze medal of the Polish Championship in 2015? Is that you? Are you the famous volleyball playing Wojciech Włodarczyk? In fact, sub-question, do I have any famous or noteworthy people listening to this podcast? Are there any famous people from around the world listening to this show? I have taught English to a couple of famous people. One of them was the football player, the Brazilian World Cup winning footballer, Haide Oliveira, brother of Socrates. Socrates, the football player, of course, not the Greek philosopher. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? So I did teach English to him and played football with him too. But I wonder if I've got other sort of famous people out there listening. If you are sort of a known person, I would love to know that you're listening to my podcast. So please do get in touch and let me know. Don't be shy. All right, don't be shy about it. You could either leave a comment, or if you want to do it more discreetly, you could just email me, luketeacher@hotmail.com. And you can say, hi, Luke. I would not normally be so, I'm normally very modest, but I thought you might like to know that I'm a famous TV presenter, or I'm a famous actor or musician in my country, and I like listening to your podcasts. And hello, I would love to hear from you, please. If you are a sort of like a champion volleyball player or something. Anyway, so Wojciech said this: Luke, have you ever heard about a very great method which is called shadowing? This is a very great method to improve your speaking skills, listening skills and pronunciation. It involves reading a short text while listening to how a native speaker reads it. This is a very practical exercise. I recommend this method to everyone. Maybe it could be very helpful to do some shadowing on the podcast. So my response to this is yes, I have heard of shadowing, and I have talked about it quite a lot on the podcast over the years. I encourage it a lot during premium episodes, and premium episode series almost always have an episode at the end dedicated to either listen and repeat pronunciation practice, where you can listen to me say a couple of lines a few times and you have to repeat them after me, or shadowing exercises. So how to do shadowing to practice your English? A lot of you will be familiar with this already, but still I think it's a good idea to just sort of refresh your memory of it and maybe make you reconsider doing it. So there are several ways to do this. All you need is some speech with a text. Now you can do it without the text if you want. There is also a way to do it without a text, but you could do it with any parts of my episodes that have scripts. Those are introductions or stories that are scripted, and especially premium episodes, and especially the story time series in my premium episodes. Those all contain stories that are scripted. But other options are things like TED Talks, British Council podcasts, BBC Learning English, anything where you can listen to someone speaking and there's a script of it too, word for word. But you don't have to do it with a script. In fact, option 1 here is to do this with no script, with no preparation, and this is just the basic version. So here, what you do is you just try to say what the other person is saying at the same time as them, or maybe slightly behind them. Right? So you're literally just listening to someone. You've never heard it before, but you're just trying to say exactly what they are saying at the same time. So try it. Now you could try it with me. Try it right now as you're listening to this. Just try and say exactly the same things I am saying as I am saying them. Let me demonstrate with a podcast. And I'm just going to do this the basic way by holding my phone to the microphone. So I've been listening to the Louis Theroux podcast. I recommend it. Louis Theroux is one of my favourite people. That's Louis, and his surname Theroux is spelt Theroux. I love Louis Theroux, and I've always been a fan of his since the early days when he was on TV. He's one of my favourite people. This episode of the Louis Theroux podcast is actually an interview with Trevor Noah, who was mentioned on this podcast by Amber a few episodes ago, if you remember. So I'm just going to demonstrate shadowing with this episode. I'm in the middle of the episode. I'm just going to press play and try to demonstrate it to you.
Ways of speaking, that it feels like
I'm really getting an inside look in South Africa's really like, as well as obviously being funny. There's a lot of comedy.
Having a gift and what
what it was.
No,
I really wasn't. Because I think for most of my life, it wasn't a gift. It was a curse, in a way. My mother tells me of how everyone loathed the moment that I would walk into a room. Everyone in my family. If Trevor walks into a room, just pray to God. You see? Now this technique was mentioned also to me by Jerome Butler. I can't remember the episode now, but Jerome Butler is a voice coach, an accent coach from Hollywood. He works with a lot of actors in American TV shows and movies. And when actors are trying to pick up a certain accent, like for example, Trevor Noah speaks with a South African accent, that he recommended that people do that his actors actually find a sample of someone speaking in that accent and just repeat along with it like that, trying to focus on the intonation, the vowel sounds and things like that. So that's the basic version. You just try and say what the other person has said. You might need to, you might say it just a beat after they've said it. But anyway, you could do this for quite a long time. Bear in mind that it might be important to check the script, if there is one, just to make sure that you really know what you're saying and you're not reinforcing things you've misunderstood. So it can be worth just confirming that you are saying what you think you're saying. But that's the basic version of shadowing. Then you've got option 2, which is where you do this with a script, and this is a more structured approach. So first of all, you read the text of the audio that you're going to work with. For example, it could be the script to a TED Talk or one of my solo episodes, maybe a story or something. Take time to understand anything new to you, so you just read it and you understand it. Then you read the text out loud. This is without the audio. You just read it out loud on your own. And we know from previous episodes of this podcast that this itself has a number of benefits on its own, just reading out texts. But you read it out loud. Then you listen to the speaker reading it out loud. So you play the audio and listen to the speakers saying it, and you compare your version to the speaker's version. You could even try recording yourself and listening to the two and seeing the differences. Then try to do it again after you've identified bits to work on. So you just read out the script again after you've compared. So there's that. Then option 3 is you listen and repeat and check the script. So this is similar to option 2, but slightly different. So first of all, you take a short section of audio with a script, like I've said before. You listen to it and use the script to help you understand everything. So it's just important to make sure you understand what you're going to work with, because understanding has to come first before you work on pronunciation and stuff. So just look at the script, listen to it, understand everything. Then go back to the start of the section and listen to it again without the script. So it's really important that you cover up the script at this point. And as you listen, pause after each line. So you just play a bit.
He has a radio in his chest.
He has a radio in his chest.
They were like, this kid walks into a room and he just does not stop.
This kid walks into a room and he just does not stop. You see, so I'm just repeating it line after line, and I'm not looking at the script. So as you listen, you pause after each line and repeat exactly what you hear without looking at the script. Then you check that line in the script and repeat it again. So after you've done it without the script, you do it with the script and repeat again. Then when you've done the whole thing, you put the audio away and just read the script out loud yourself. Okay, so that's a few different options. And in fact, here is one that you can use right now, and you can use whichever method you want. So I'm going to read a speech to you now from a movie, from one of my favourite films, Three Amigos. I've talked about Three Amigos before I think with my brother James. And this is the script from a speech at the end of the film. So a quick plot summary, if you don't know the Three Amigos. Basically, it's a film with Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, Martin Short. It's a classic, very charming American comedy. The plot is basically the three amigos are actors from Hollywood. After a misunderstanding in which they thought they were being called to Mexico for a film shoot, they actually turn into real heroes and help the residents of a small Mexican village which is being terrorized by a group of bandits led by a man called El Guapo. And El Guapo is a very bad guy. One of the amigos, whose name is Lucky Day, that's Steve Martin's character, one of the amigos gives a motivational speech. And this is the speech. So this is what you can work with here. You can either just try and repeat this after me right now without looking at the script, or you can use one of the other methods that I said before. So anyway, just try and repeat these things after me. Okay, here's the script. Someday, the people of this village will have to face El Guapo. We might as well do it now. In a way, all of us have an El Guapo to face someday. For some, shyness might be their El Guapo. For others, a lack of education might be their El Guapo. For us, El Guapo is a big dangerous guy who wants to kill us. But as sure as my name is Lucky Day, the people of Santa Poco can conquer their own personal El Guapo, who also happens to be the actual El Guapo. Then one of the villagers says, we want to defend ourselves, but how? By using the skills and the talents of the people of Santa Poco. This is not a town of weaklings. You can turn your skills against El Guapo. Now, what is it that this town really does well? And the villagers all think, and one of them goes, well, we can sew. There you go. You can sew. If only we'd known about this earlier. Sewing involves, making clothes, right? Using a thread and a needle, or maybe a sewing machine, and making clothes, right? By threading the threading the thread, the cotton thread, through fabric and stitching things together and making clothes, right? Okay, so anyway, that was just that little El Guapo speech from Three Amigos, which you could just practice repeating after me, right? Someday the people of this village will have to face El Guapo. We might as well do it now. In a way, all of us have an El Guapo to face someday. For some, shyness might be their El Guapo. For others, A lack of education might be their El Guapo. For us, El Guapo is a big dangerous guy who wants to kill us. But as sure as my name is Lucky Day, the people of Santa Poco can conquer their own personal El Guapo, who also happens to be the actual El Guapo. We want to defend ourselves, but how? By using the skills and the talents of the people of Santa Poco. This is not a town of weaklings. You can turn your skills against El Guapo. Now, what is it that this town really does well? Oh, we can sew. There you go. You can sew. If only we'd known about this earlier. So what happens is that the amigos go on to use the sewing skills of the people of Santa Poco to defeat El Guapo and his gang of bandits. And it's good. Anyway, this is the end of the Bits and Bobs series for now. This is the end of part 5. Maybe I'll do another one when I've collected more bits and bobs. Feel free to send me your questions and comments and other things. I'd love to share them on the podcast. Now, I hope that you have learned a thing or two and perhaps got a bit of a motivational boost from this series, as well as a couple of laughs and, bits of English. I'll continue to save bits and bobs in my Google Drive when I find them. Other cloud drives are available, of course. So maybe in another 6 years I can continue the series. But for now, I will wish you a fond farewell until next time. And don't forget, check out the PDF for all the notes and stuff, and a massive vocabulary list at the end as well. And also LEP Premium for more episodes, fully prepared episodes with detailed vocab lists, vocab quizzes, memory tests, and more to help you learn English in the way that I think it should actually be done. teacherluke.co.uk/premium. And if you're still listening, perhaps leave a comment about your own personal El Guapo and how you could defeat it, or perhaps a fun fact about your country, or maybe your favourite older episode from the episode archive, or you could tell us about whether or not you listen to this podcast in some sort of interesting situation, or if you are a famous person who listens to the podcast. I would love to hear from you. But for now, until next time, it's just time for me to say goodbye. Bye, 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 bye.